Man, where do we even start with this game? Because it I am absolutely just blown away. I thought people were kind of overselling it maybe just a little bit when they were saying that it's, I heard people saying either, it's just Fallen Order but better. And then I had some of the people saying, it's one of the best RPGs that they've ever played. I gotta say, I'm leaning more on the side of one of the best RPGs I've ever played. Especially for something this big and open world and just fleshed out. Such an incredible experience, and I don't think I'm going to forget it for a while. I guess just to start off, the main thing that always caught my attention was just the world itself. I was kind of disappointed when we first jumped into the game. There kind of started exploring around. There weren't as many planets as Fallen Order, but what we have is massive. You kind of go in, it's like, okay, this world's kind of cute. And it's all of a sudden you open this section, this section. Suddenly you've got like 8 little worlds in this gargantuan map to explore. And it is gorgeous. I don't know how many times I was just walking around and just kind of got lost looking at stuff. It was amazing that they built such a large world and made it so alive. Because it's one thing to have a world that's just huge. It's another thing to actually populate it, which they also did, honestly, I would say almost a little too much. You had like 3 or 4 different factions and wildlife, or not 4, but you had like 2 or 3 factions plus wildlife, all just coexisting in this world, walking around. That you could run into, you start combat, you could see other people fighting each other. And on top of that, you just have a whole slew of collectibles. And there's just so much to do. Oh, side quests as well, people to talk to. And just go do things on the side. It's like, oh my god. I'd almost say to the point to almost where there's kind of a little too much, I will say. Collectibles are fun, but when you have literally hundreds, needless to say, it got very, very exhausting very quickly. A lot of the stuff I kind of found just as I was going around. I would be surprised if you didn't have to look up a guide to get a lot of the collectibles, because it really was. Put it this way, I spent 16 hours alone over the course of 2 days just getting collectibles. It's insane. And honestly, it wasn't the most fun, but the payoff was very nice. The payoff being, a lot of customizable options. Just the amount of customization was amazing. Was it worth it? To an extent, yes, but at the same time, I feel like they really could have dialed it back just a little bit. Because it was really a lot. With the enemies in the world, I mean, that was also great. You gotta populate your world, but I found myself at one point really just avoiding enemies more than engaging. Like, it was kind of cool and fun at first, but then at some point it's like, especially when you're exploring around, or especially when you're doing collectibles, it's like, okay, I'm just gonna wait for this patrol, because I'd rather just wait than engage in combat, or you go around, take a detour. Especially with a lot of wildlife. I mean, obviously it makes sense for some people to go kill on sight, but a lot of the wildlife was just tedious to deal with. And it made kind of traversing around the world a little... I guess the word I would just keep on saying is exhausting. Like, I don't want to deal with this, you move on. Other than that, phenomenal world. I think in terms of traversing, though, we should definitely talk about that, because I gotta say, the platforming in this game, especially for a 3D platformer, one of the best I have ever played. I've been playing games for a little more than 20 years now, but I found myself constantly reminiscing back to the old days where 3D platforming was popular. Jak and Daxter and Ratchet and Clank were the 2 I mainly referenced. Bit of Crash Bandicoot in there. I could honestly say probably God of War came to mind a lot. Darksiders, in terms of just the way you moved. It felt so damn good. So when you have a giant world with all this stuff to do, and you can make it traverse, I mean, it's such a beautiful combination, and one that I enjoyed immensely. However, I will say that as good as the platforming was, again, I'm going to keep using the word exhausting. There were times it's like, okay, I get it, traversing this path. Let's get to something going on now. I'm sick of climbing. I'm sick of jumping around on walls. Let's get to it. You know? There was just a lot of it. Which isn't inherently a bad thing, especially with a lot of the uniquities that they had coming in with the puzzles that you had to solve sometimes, the different aspects of planets, puzzle rooms. I think I just mentioned puzzles twice. You eventually get more upgrades in order to traverse things and find new paths along paths you already did, which was kind of cool, but again, it's kind of a novelty that kind of wears off. There was a lot of time I really wish, yeah, less traversal, a little more action, but at the same time, you know, you had so much in the world. I don't know, I feel like there's a balance somewhere. I guess the word I would really use for a lot of the world was just overwhelming. It was just a lot to take in at once. But, again, as is, still fantastic. I don't know if I could necessarily complain. I'm very evenly balanced on that. But I guess getting into combat, again, probably one of the better combats I've seen in an RPG game like this. You have like 6 or 7 different stances you can choose from, different ways to move about and combat enemies. And it's so awesome because a lot of games, you know, you have 1 or 2 kind of ways you just play. And with these stances, you can really diversify how you go about doing combat. Or, you know, you run back to your little spawn point to actually change your stances to adhere to a specific type of fight or enemies. And I think it was a very cool kind of thing to add. And it really kind of customized the way you can play too, which I love. You'll definitely find some favorites, you'll definitely have some least favorites. Especially when you get into the whole skill system, that's just a whole extra layer of stuff, and I loved it. However, even with that, I will say, at the end of the day, you were just kind of pushing buttons in more or less the same way. I know that sounds kind of silly, like, oh, duh, of course you are. But it's like, it felt more as an aesthetic, more so than like an actual, kind of like, oh, this is better than this, or I want to use this in this situation. I ended up coming down to maybe only like 3 that I really ever used, because I didn't see the effectivity of something else over what I was using, because they played very similarly. So I feel like it's a lot more of an aesthetic, but, you know, it's an aesthetic that's very, very welcome. I guess under performance, I know when this game came out, there were a lot of performance problems being reported. I was playing 2 to 3 weeks after release, so I only assume it's going to get better after this. I'm playing on an Xbox Series X, and I will say that the only real problems I've had, there were only maybe 2 or 3 times that I can really think of where I had frames drop a little bit, and even then it wasn't substantial, it wasn't for very long, but it was still there. Again, very rare. 3 times over the course of 48 hours for maybe a matter of 10-15 seconds apiece, not bad. My main thing that I came across was texture issues. Running through the world, especially if you had a mount or if you were doing some kind of special traverse, you really kind of had to wait for the world to almost load. Things look very blurry and gooey and like awful. And you had to wait for the texture to like pop in. That was probably the biggest thing that I saw. A lot of missing textures sometimes too, like in the distance, you had to wait for it to like pop in, very jarring. I think I can name 2 times where the textures weren't there and I fell through the floor or phased through a wall. But other than that, you know, still very playable. The performance was pretty good. I will say too, I played with it off stream in my own time on my original Xbox One, which I, believe it or not, still have one of those. And I mean, there were a lot more frame drops, a lot more. The texture issues were a little bit more substantial. And of course, increased loading times on an older system, but otherwise, still surprisingly playable. overall, the performance, I'd say, was very, very good. You're not going to get it perfect. Yeah. I guess in terms of other bugs, there wasn't really many. I had a couple things where I'd either couldn't pick something up, I couldn't scan something. No issues with enemies, which is very good. I think the only substantial bug that I had was I don't want to say anything just because I don't want to go into any kind of spoilers or anything. But there was one bug that I had that was very substantial that really took away a very large part of the game for me. And I wasn't able to do... It was a series of side quests. And it got to a point where the person I was talking to just wouldn't give them to me. And unfortunately, I could not complete it, which was very, very disappointing. It was due to a bug. Couldn't fix it other than, just starting a brand new game and hoping it works, which is incredibly unfortunate. Oh yeah, that's one thing I didn't touch on. Just the people. It's so populated. Oh man. That's all I'm gonna really say on that, I think. I've been rambling on long enough. This game is next level. It is so good. The amount of just things to do, the people to talk to, just the puzzles to solve, the way to traverse and to play is so diverse, it's not even funny. Absolutely gorgeous game. Even though it had its problems, even with the substantial problem that I had that completely removed a whole quest line for me, I can still look over all of that and look at this game and go, wow. I think that's my thoughts on Jedi Survivor.